I think getting rid of Boris was a huge mistake. I'm absolutely open about it. He was a huge electoral asset.
So you slightly equivocated on whether you'd like to see him become an MP?
Yeah, I just tell you yes. I'm just going to tell you yes. I think we should have Conservatives in the Conservative Party.
So do you see Kemi Badenoch, who you've backed twice before, do you see her as a Margaret Thatcher or potentially a Liz Truss?
Well, let's hope we can find another Margaret Thatcher. That would be a wonderful, wonderful thing to do.
You say that David Cameron, former Tory leader, former Prime Minister, told you, and I quote, "Life would be easier if colleagues paid their expenses on time and didn't snort coke and sodomise each other." What is it about being an MP and being in politics today that makes people behave this way? Hello and welcome to the Political Fourcast here at the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham. Despite warnings to keep it clean, Kemi Badenoch, Robert Jenrick, Tugendhat and James Cleverly have been quietly tearing chunks out of each other as they vie to be the next Conservative leader. But what is the future of the Tory party? Pivot harder to the right to win back reform voters, or tack to the centre? Can any of the leadership candidates haul the party back from the brink, or is the past the future? Boris Johnson's autobiography is helpfully being serialised in the Daily Mail just in time to overshadow the events here. So, to dig into all of this and more, I spoke to two party giants. Sir Graham Brady, Lord Brady, was the chairman of the influential 1922 Committee of Backbenchers for almost 15 years, and he's just released a book called Kingmaker, giving an insider's account of the Tory leadership campaigns he presided over. We also caught up with Grant Shapps, who's held several cabinet positions over the years and could have been a candidate for the next Tory leader if he hadn't lost his seat, along with a huge swathe of his colleagues in the election. Grant Shapps, there's speculation that you're going to get a by-election seat. I mean, having lost your seat, lost your whole career, you really want to do it all again?
No, I'm certainly not now. I'm very happy, adjusting to this new life, having my own time back, being able to see my family and all of those sort of things. So I'm in no rush to dart back. And also, the party's in opposition. I've been used to being in government. I've been a cabinet minister in a lot of different...
It'll be a bit of a come down.
In a lot of different jobs. Well, no, that's that. I've discovered I was in more cabinet roles than anyone since Jim Callaghan. So, I've done all of that. And I'm very much enjoying having a little bit of time to decompress and what have you. So I'm in no rush to go back straight into Westminster. One day, yes, maybe.
Well, a little birdie tells me that the seat next to your old one is about to come up.
I don't think that little birdie's story is actually true.
Oh, really?
I don't
You've checked it out?
Well, apart from anything, I'm not ready to return, and I doubt that story is actually true. Right. So I think there's two very good reasons why that's very unlikely to happen.
You lost your seat. It was humiliating, I assume. But when you gather here, do you get any sense that your colleagues know how close the party came to annihilation?
Just to be clear, I didn't feel at all humiliated as you described it. Not least because I stood in that seat. I didn't win till the second time I got it, so I knew that it was a marginal seat. I held it for 19 years, but I always knew that against a difficult run it would be hard to hold. And maybe I'm wrong here, but I took our failure to win it as being perhaps more to do with the national picture than what was going on locally.
You must take responsibility for your part in that campaign. Do you? I mean,
it's not the campaign that I would have run, and indeed I was the only person in the pre-meeting before the main cabinet when the Prime Minister told the main cabinet there was a small pre-meeting of the kind of senior high officers of state or cabinet roles, and I was the only one who actually said, I really would not have called an election now. I've sort of seen how this movie ends, and it's not a happy ending.
Right, and you were forceful in that.
I was polite about it, but I was clear that I didn't think it was a good time. But
yeah, are people in denial here?
I don't think so. I mean, I actually think, and I might be in a minority here, but it's actually, when a party goes into opposition, it's quite cathartic for the party to have something like a main conference, to think through the issues, to look at the different candidates, to think about the way the future could look under different individuals. And I wouldn't be put off by, there's some row about this, that, there. I mean, the whole point is we're in politics to debate things, so why shouldn't there be a debate?
You're the chair of James Cleverly's campaign. Do you think he can pull off a David Cameron moment, that he could, he's probably the the laggard in the race at the moment, or one of them anyway.
Well, I don't think he's actually terribly behind as you describe, and yes, he definitely can. Anyone who says they know what's going to happen in this leadership contest is bluffing right now.
But aren't the four contenders sort of tickling the tummies of the membership rather than, as you say, thinking about how they might appeal to the public?
Well, first of all, it's not unreasonable to appeal to the people who are actually going to be your voters, so I get that. My point to the voters, the membership, would be that's good, but let's look beyond this if you want to win. And the reason, there's a very good reason why the Tory party is the world's most successful democratic party, at a very low ebb given this last election, but have this extraordinary longevity. And the reason for that is we usually have a real hunger to win. And my point to the members is...
You can't be complacent about that, can you?
No, absolutely not. And this is exactly my point, actually. We can't be complacent about it. My point, therefore, to the membership is get that hunger back. Let's go and win.
The Tories don't have a God-given right to exist.
Correct.
I mean, you could get wiped out the way the Liberals got wiped out at the beginning of the 20th century.
Anything is possible, and we need to have that in our minds.
Totally.
But do I think that's the most likely thing to happen next? Actually, I don't. Because the other thing that we've always conventionally, traditionally been good at is recognising where we've gone wrong and putting it right. And sometimes that's involved periods of opposition we're in now. I have every faith that we'll do that. And I'll tell you why I think that's the case and why I don't think other parties have been able to achieve the same thing. If you look at Britain, we're a fundamentally centre-right country. Not extreme, but we value hard work. The Labour Party, to win an election, has to move onto what essentially I think is Conservative territory.
Well,
That's
no, but
what
they would say they've just
do.
moved to the centre and they've got the centre ground and you've vacated it.
Well, it's interesting that the two
I mean,
levers...
look at Jacob Rees-Mogg saying do a pact with
Well,
Reform.
you're
far to the right now.
Well, you'll always have a wide variety of views, but think about what Blair did and think about what Starmer did. They've copied the same, or Starmer's copied the Blair playbook. They've moved, or pretended to move to centre-right, got themselves elected, and then they're satisfying their union friends, about to jack up taxes and the rest of it. So that is always their playbook. We don't have to do that. We are genuinely at our best. We're on the centre-right, where the public is. Reform, a party who, like a lot of the parties in Europe, are putting up a very, very good protest vote. But if I asked, and did, on thousands of doorsteps, people who weren't going to vote for me but said, look, Grant, we really like you, we've always supported you, we can't vote for you this time, I'm afraid we're going to vote Reform. If I went on and said, oh great, bad, what can you tell me about Reform's policy? I wasn't going to get a litany of, it's because they support this, that. No, it's because they wanted to teach us a lesson and couldn't bring themselves to vote Labour. So again, Reform aren't where the majority of the country is. And the Lib Dems, I mean, you know, whatever they're doing, they are just not, and have not been for a long time where the country is. So, my argument is not that it's easy, it's just that we've got to confidently occupy our centre-right position and then we match...
And not go any further to the right.
And match the country. There'll be places where we need to be very clear that we will sort out that problem. Now, that could be illegal immigration. And we need to have a very clear plan. We need to set that plan out and stick to it, but then not think that that's the only thing that we need to hammer on about, because, you know, as this election has demonstrated, going on about stopping small votes doesn't mean you get elected to stop the small votes.
You've talked about losing your seat and, you know, the sort of, well, the virtual annihilation the party suffered. Some here seem to be in denial about that, because Liz Truss says the party would have done much better if she'd stayed as Prime Minister, and also that you shouldn't have got rid of Boris Johnson. Is she in denial? Is he in denial about that?
Well, look, actually, I think getting rid of Boris was a huge mistake. I'm absolutely open about it. I said so at the time. I fought endlessly to try to convince colleagues that this is a very, very bad idea. He was a huge electoral asset. He had a vision for the country, levelling up and the rest of it, that I think resonated, and we know it did, because he got us elected in parts of the country we weren't winning.
Do you think you'd have won the election and you'd have kept your seat if he'd stayed?
Yes, I certainly would have kept my seat. I don't know whether we won the election, but I certainly would have kept my seat, I think.
But it could have been a hung parliament under Boris Johnson.
I mean, who knows, because percentages are... You only have to move things very small amounts. It's impossible to say exactly what the... But I thought the party was better off with Boris. Now, I know that some people took huge offence by Partygate and the rest of it.
There was, you know, red wine splashed up the wall, a swing broken in the garden. I'm not saying Boris Johnson himself did that, but he presided over that kind of culture.
Okay, and here's where I agree with you. I think that his failure, if you like, to ensure that somebody in the organisation, his chief of staff, or I remember Boris was in hospital for a lot of this, for a chunk of this period as well, but to make sure, a chief of staff or someone should have been going, guys, this is not,
It was a failure of leadership.
So in that sense, yes, but the consensus is often written up that somehow Boris was like loving it. It's not even a partier, so I very much doubt that would be the case. So I actually think, going back to that, yes, we would have been better off to recognise that Boris had an appeal and reach that few other politicians did. He also, I think, had a vision. I also thought he was a very enjoyable Prime Minister to work for, not because of parties, which I wasn't involved with, but because he actually had some vision and would push his ministers further to deliver it. And by the way, that saved thousands of lives in this country and millions of lives around the world. I was in the meetings where he insisted that we went further on funding COVID protections, including the vaccine, that we rolled it out faster than any other developed country in the world. Why don't we talk about that in his legacy? Why don't
let's see what the COVID inquiry has to say.
Why don't we ever talk about the fact that he alone, and I've talked to President Zelensky about this many times, was responsible for catalysing the West to get on and support Ukraine. According to Zelensky, without this country, which brackets means without Boris, that country would have been, Ukraine would have been overrun.
I just want to circle back to Boris Johnson because you slightly equivocated on whether you'd like to see him become an MP.
Yeah, I'll just tell you yes. I'm just going to tell you yes. I think we should have Conservatives in the Conservative Party, and somebody who won our biggest majority for goodness knows how many years, I think 30 years or what. Yeah, of course they should be in the Conservative Party. Why would you not have them as an MP? And by the way, he was an MP previously, and then of course Mayor of London. All the time that David Cameron was a leader, and although it used to cause a kerfuffle, I remember the day he'd turn up at conference and we still won elections, we still, so absolutely we should have him in the party, and everyone. I want all Conservatives to be in this party. I do. I just think
on the Commons benches.
If that's what he wants to do, I slightly doubt it's what he wants to do. But yes,
he's earning a lot of money.
Yes, it's a straight.
He's earning a lot of money
answer.
outside.
Well, that might be another reason.
I appreciate the straight answer, but a lot of people see him as a very toxic figure, someone who's lying and deceiving the Commons, sort of brought the party into disrepute.
And actually now with a little bit of perspective on it, do you think it was right that the woman who was investigating him, the most senior civil service investigating him, behind his back, was having negotiations with the leader of the opposition to become the leader of the opposition's chief of staff?
Not exactly at the same time.
I think, I think the two did. I might be wrong, but I think actually the two may have intersected, but we'll leave others to...
People thought her report was very generous to him.
Investigate that, but it doesn't matter if it's generous or not. And I like Sue Gray, by the way, and I actually like Keir Starmer. It's not that. It's that, can you not see that that's not appropriate? And,
but that's
in the same
not
way,
addressing his behaviour.
No, in the same way, and let me be completely rounded on this, in the same way as I don't think that Boris Johnson is not a perfect person. I can see his flaws, perhaps many flaws, and we all have flaws. I can see his flaws. I don't think he's perfect. But to single him out and then to ignore the fact that Keir Starmer thought that it was appropriate to do that, let alone the other things that he lectured us about doing, and then turned out with all this... I don't really care about all this Frockgate and Glasses Gate and whatever else it's called. What I care about is the fact that he was lecturing us all about probity, and then turns out to be... That's what matters.
You don't think Boris Johnson...
hypocrisy.
You don't think
I never thought he was a hypocrite.
Okay, so it's okay to lie, but...
No, I don't think it's good to lie, and I would never, just to be clear, I would never personally been flippant about the important things that were going on and the rest of it. We're all different. What I find interesting though is, why would you apply a different? Why is it okay?
We're applying a different standard.
Yeah, why is it okay for Sir Keir Starmer to be in politics, but somehow not for Boris Johnson? Boris Johnson's a man...
Well, he's getting a pretty rough ride in the press at the moment.
Fair dues to you guys, but Boris Johnson's a man who, as you say, and it's been widely published, and what have you, some people say lied and did things wrong. He's also a man who saved many lives through the COVID vaccine, and I saw what he did. He sent us back to the drawing board when he didn't think our rollout was fast enough. So we were all vaccinated before our French neighbours because of Boris Johnson, and that will have saved lives. And then that vaccine was sent around the world, and then he went to Ukraine and has helped that country.
But to come back to COVID, A lot of people say the freebies scandal that is currently unfolding under Keir Starmer is of a completely different order to the kind of handing out contracts to cronies during the COVID era, which happened under Boris Johnson.
Well, hold on a minute. I mean, I think there's a lot of nonsense talked about that stuff as well. Like, everything went to the civil servants who will have done whatever the normal process is, and it's unfortunate and sad and should be punished if there were people who are corrupt in that process. But that's entirely different from this confected story that Labour got going, that somehow because you passed on a constituent's email address, there was some sort of, secret channel going on. How? We're like rewriting history. In an emergency where the world needed protective clothing in order to save lives, an appeal goes out, MPs are contacted from any MP and given an email address to send it to. How on earth have we ended up?
And it was then abused by...
By who?
Well,
I
mean, there is a criminal investigation going on.
Right, so criminals exist everywhere, right? There are people who do the wrong thing in all walks of life, right? And so, prosecute them and send them to jail as far as I'm concerned. But that is not the same as saying, the whole system was corrupt.
Just to bring it back to where we started, what's happening here, the Conservative leadership contest and so on, you wrote in an email to failed election candidates that you wanted the party to be brutally focused on refreshing the Conservatives quickly. Just set out then, in a nutshell, how you think you should do that.
Yes. So actually this whole exercise almost came about by accident. I sat down and wrote an email very quickly after the election, reflecting on my own experience. Probably a cathartic experience for me to write the email saying, look, I'd been here before. I'd actually stood 5 times before I won my Welland Hatfield seat, and I know that you have to be tenacious and keep coming back. And I basically wrote that to candidates who didn't win and got the most enormous response. I was quite surprised by the size and scale of the response. Pages. And so decided to put that together into a report, maybe do something with it. That's the report that's being launched tomorrow. It's called Conservatives Together, or CTOG. For short, and it's sort of called What Went Wrong, and it's a big analysis of that, but also some quantitative data about what would have to have been different for us to win. And from that, and we're only launching it here, so I'm gathering support from MPs and candidates, we're going to put together a group of us who'll help to learn those lessons. For example, think about what we need to do in the future.
All right, chaps, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Lord Brady, you say in the book, and I quote, all prime ministers go mad. So of these 4 candidates, if any of them get to be prime minister, who would be likely to go mad first?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I'm not sure you can ever quite tell until they've really experienced office. I think Keir Starmer is doing it very, very quickly, and I think he deserves full credit for moving faster than anybody to date. But no, I deliberately leave that hanging there for the readers who come to their own conclusions about the former ones.
Well, I'll come back to the current contest in a moment, but I just wanted to pick up a point that you make in the book about the calibre of politicians, because a lot of people are looking at the 4 in the contest now and saying, well, that's a pretty poor choice. There's no one I can see as, prime ministerial material. You say that David Cameron, former Tory leader, former Prime Minister, told you, and I quote, life would be easier if colleagues paid their expenses on time and didn't snort coke and sodomise each other. In recent years, we've had an MP looking at tractor porn, we've had another accused of groping people at a bar, we've had another sending explicit pictures of his private parts. What is it about being an MP and being in politics today that makes people behave this way?
I suspect you get some elements of those behaviours in any walk of life. There's obviously a lot more scrutiny if you're in politics, and especially if you're in government at the time, then there's a lot of media attention paid when something goes wrong and somebody gets caught doing something odd or bad or illegal.
But is it just scrutiny, or is it actually something about the pressure of being an MP?
It's possible it's something about the pressure of being an MP. It's possible you get some people who thrive on adrenaline, who are attracted to politics. If so, then I think it was ever thus.
Right. So it's not something about the sort of egos that, when you talk about people going mad when they become Prime Minister, is it a sort of toxic combination of ego and pressure, perhaps?
I think there's ego, there's pressure, and I think probably the biggest danger of all is that people get compartmentalised with a group of people that they have chosen. So one of the things I've always thought is very important about the role of chairman of the 1922 committee in the Conservative Party is that you become the only advisor to a Conservative Prime Minister whom the Prime Minister hasn't chosen. You've been chosen by your colleagues and are able to go and represent their interests, their concerns, their thoughts, but just with a different view.
Yeah, so you sort of see your role when you were 1922 chair as providing sort of wise counsel to the Prime Minister of the day at a time when they most need it, but they quite often ignored your advice, didn't they?
And of course that's fine. It's always going to be for a Prime Minister to decide whether they take advice or they don't. But I think it's a good thing to have access to a wider variety of people giving opinions. And if you just end up spending your time with the people you've chosen, you've selected, who've been part of your team, maybe worked with you forever, then you're going to end up with a more and more limited and narrow set of opinions and set of advice.
We've just come out of this extraordinary 14 years, which has been dramatic, if you like, the drama of politics, but also probably pretty upsetting for some, not least Conservatives here who have faced almost total annihilation. Whoever wins this contest, is the most important thing to face up to how close you all came to political oblivion?
Well, I think we're all acutely aware of that. It was a devastating election result. And of course, my career in the House of Commons is bookended by two catastrophic election results. I was first elected to the House in 1997 with that Blair landslide going on, and I stood down just before the election at which we had an even worse result with only 121 MPs as opposed to the 165 that was elected in 1997. So I think it's a very difficult thing to avoid recognising the scale of the loss, seeing the number of excellent colleagues who lost their seats. There are
some people who seem to be in a bit of denial about it. I mean, not least Liz Truss, former, shortest Prime Minister of the last 14 years, who sort of seems to suggest, she said today, that the party would have done better if they clung on to her or Boris Johnson.
Liz is entitled to her opinion, but I think that what we have is a very unstable result in that the Labour Party won an enormous majority, but with quite a small percentage of those voting and a low turnout, so an even smaller percentage of those eligible to vote. Only just over 20% of people eligible to vote voted actively for this Labour government, and yet it's got a huge majority.
So you think it's quite easy to topple that majority?
I'm not saying easy, I'm saying possible. They weren't a popular government when they were elected, and the size of their parliamentary majority could easily be seen as disguising that or hiding it from people. But also, when you look at the number of very, very small majorities that there are a lot of seats that could change back or change to another party with very few votes moving.
Don't you think you're in danger of complacency, though?
No,
I mean, the former Chancellor Jeremy Hunt said you can't assume people are going to return to the fold.
I agree. Of course you can't. One of the problems we had at the election in July and the period before that, we hadn't given Conservative voters or people who are inclined to vote Conservative enough positive reasons to make that choice. I think they were desperate. Many people really wanted us to excite them, wanted us to offer them something that was going to give them a real positive reason. And I think it was a very tough judgment for Rishi and for Jeremy Hunt to call that. Their first objective was to restore stability and calm and order and re-establish a reputation for economic competence. But then at some point there had to be a flip to something that was going to paint a more exciting, more enticing picture of how things could be made a lot better under a future Conservative government. And we never really got there.
But is the task of getting back into government so tough that you need to, as Jacob Rees-Mogg says, form some kind of pact with reform? You're not going to get there on your own.
I think it's very difficult to form a pact with a party that's just fought an election pledged to destroy you. I think we could reasonably assume that they don't have our best interests at heart at this point.
But ignore the siren voices of reform. Then,
well, I don't think we ignore any voices, but I think it's more important that we do and say the right things as Conservatives rather than worrying about other parties.
Right, so what are doing and saying the right things as a Conservative? I mean, how bold have one of those four contenders, whoever wins, how bold have they got to be? For example, you write in your book about how much you admired Margaret Thatcher back as a teenager. You said that she felt like a radical. So do you see Kemi Badenoch, who you've backed twice before, do you see her as a Margaret Thatcher or potentially a Liz Truss?
Well, I mean, let's hope we can find another Margaret Thatcher. That would be a wonderful, wonderful thing to do. But I think the crucial thing about Margaret Thatcher was that everybody knew what direction she was pointing in, and nobody doubted that she really meant it and believed it. It didn't mean that she lacked subtlety. She was actually a very pragmatic politician in how she got there. She would only take on the fight when she knew she could win it. And it was a crucial part of her success that she planned very, very carefully.
So she was cautious.
She was cautious.
Not a word you'd ascribe to Kemi Badenoch right now.
Possibly not. But as I say, it's very early days. What we need to see, I think, in whoever comes forward as the leader of the party, is that the public will see an authenticity, a genuine belief, real direction, and a sense that they will be able to lead the country in a direction. And I think
who's the most authentic of those four then on the stage?
Well, I think we've got four very good candidates at the moment. I'm very consciously not backing anybody until, and maybe I will when we're down to the final two.
But you did back Kemi twice before.
I voted for Kemi in the first two rounds of the last leadership election.
So what's holding you back endorsing her this time? Are you sort of worried that she's being tested and found a little bit wanting?
No, I think it's a very good thing that all the candidates are being tested. I think it's great they're being tested here at the conference and all being exposed more to the members, people finding out more about them. And given that I now, as a humble Conservative peer, only get the one vote as a party member, I don't see any point in saying too much before the final two are reached. I think we're, given the dreadful election results and the fact we only have 121 members of Parliament, I think we've got four pretty good candidates still in the running.
With Kemi Badenoch, do you think she potentially needs a bit more time to sort of grow into that role? Maybe the next but one is her leadership.
Well, maybe that was my reservation in the previous leadership election. I voted for her twice. I switched my support to Rishi Sunak before the final part of the contest. And I thought then Kemi wasn't necessarily in the right place to walk into number 10 as Prime Minister. We're doing something very different here. We're selecting somebody to be leader of the opposition for almost certainly 4 or 5 years, and then we hope to be Prime Minister after that. So if somebody's not quite ready, they're going to have a tough and very valuable apprenticeship to serve as leader of the opposition first.
So you could take a risk on her for leader of the opposition, but you wouldn't want to see her in number 10 tomorrow?
I'm not being drawn on any one of the candidates at this point. I think they're all good. I think they all could do the job.
You've seen Liz Truss, the former Prime Minister, strutting her stuff here, saying that the party would have done better if they'd kept her on. You've described in your book how she sought your advice after the disastrous mini-budget, but then she refused to resign. Do you think she was in denial then and is still in denial now about the scale of the disaster that she unleashed on the economy?
Well, by the time I saw her on the day that she then announced her resignation, it was a very straightforward and simple conversation because she asked me how bad it was. I said I thought it was very bad. She said she agreed. And then she asked me if I thought it was retrievable. I said I didn't, and she said I've come to the same conclusion. So she certainly at that point had realised that it had gone badly wrong and couldn't be retrieved. And she took the appropriate action and made way for somebody else.
She's rowed back since then, though, hasn't she? She seems almost defiant now.
Well, she's entitled to say whatever she wants and
what do you think about what you've heard from her here today?
Opinion. Sorry?
What do you think about what you've heard from her here today?
I didn't hear what she said earlier today.
She said the party would have done better under her. I mean, what's your impression of that?
She clearly thought that she should resign at the time that she resigned.
And that was the right thing to do because you advised it at the time.
I think it was inevitable.
The other spectre that's hanging over this conference is Boris Johnson. You reveal how desperately he tried to cling on. Despite, he had one confidence vote already, he'd lost a string of ministers, including his Chancellor. I mean, apparently he believes he can still make a comeback. What would you say to him if he came to you now and said, what do you think?
Well, I suppose he'd have to find himself a constituency to fight, become a member of Parliament.
There's always a by-election.
And then at some point in the future, there may be a leadership election. But I'm very much hoping that leadership elections become less of a habit again in the future than they were over the last few years.
But would you like to see him back in Parliament if there is a by-election?
Boris wants to stand for Parliament. If people want to elect him, then that's up to them.
But how would you feel about it?
I don't have a particularly strong view either way if he wants to be a member of Parliament.
It's clear in your book, though, that you didn't rate what he did to your party and the country. Do you think he would better serve himself and your party?
I think the COVID response was the biggest public policy error in modern history. Of course, important to say that Keir Starmer and the Labour Party would have done even worse because they provided no opposition, and all they did was ask for deeper, longer and more severe lockdowns.
So you thought he went too far on the lockdowns?
So I think that was a huge mistake, and we're living now with a lot of the challenges for government that either started then or were exacerbated by that period, whether it's in young people's mental health, whether it's in NHS waiting lists or the state of the public finances.
But let me ask you another way. Do you think it would serve the party well and the country well if he was to make a comeback as an MP?
I want one of the four candidates currently before the party to win the leadership election and then go on to be a superb leader of the opposition, proving that we're ready to come back into government in 4 or 5 years' time.
In other words, if Boris Johnson was to make a comeback into Parliament, he'd have to wait a very long time, you hope, until there's a vacancy at the top.
I very much hope that the new leader, when elected, is going to be there for a long time.
It's nearly 3 months since the general election. Do you think this beauty contest that's going on now is taking too long? You know, there's important things that the party needs to oppose, you know, to form a decent opposition. There's a budget coming up, for example.
I think that the beauty parade here, the lengthy contest, I think that's perfectly healthy. In opposition, especially after that crushing defeat, I think we've got a little bit of space. The public aren't that interested in what we do or say at the moment. So I think it's perfectly reasonable to take the luxury of a little bit of time to scrutinise the candidates properly.
You've got the four candidates strutting their stuff here. It will be whittled down to 2 by MPs, and then members get the final choice. Are you worried that we could end up with the members picking another dud? Do you think the should be MPs, not members, having the final choice?
I've said that many times, but I think that's only really important when the party's in government. I think it would make sense to align the people who choose a Conservative Prime Minister with the people who can get rid of a Conservative Prime Minister. But I also have said I don't think the system is going to change. The party's constitution is very difficult to change. So I think this system will remain. All I've said is that I think it would be wise when the parliamentary party gets down to the final 2 candidates to hold a further ballot, just so people know what the strength of support in the parliamentary party is.
An indicative ballot.
An indicative vote between those 2 final candidates. And of course that wouldn't tie the party members to voting the same way, but they would be making an informed choice. And you know, if out of 119 you had 110 supporting one candidate and 9 supporting the other, that might be a very strong signal. If it was 60-40 one way or the other, people might think it really didn't matter.
Any sign of that proposal getting taken up?
You'd have to ask my successor, Bob Blackman, but I think it would be a good addition to the process.
Lord Brady, thanks very much.
Thank you.
That's it for this edition of the Political Forecast, but we'll be here again with the latest from the conference tomorrow. For now, goodbye.